All right. Manuscript analysis. J. Mr. J. A website study by J. A website study. You look this up. Here it is here. Let's then begin by looking at the area of manuscript evidence. What manuscripts do we have in Islam, which can corroborate the authenticity of the Quran that we have in our hands today? And likewise, what Christian manuscripts are available to validate the Bible? This is scientific. I had an experiment with this man. He says, you can't take a scientific experiment with the Quran and the Bible. Yeah, you can. You read it. You follow the rules of language, context, and logic of the time that manuscript evidence was written and how it's translated into the languages of the world. By the way, the word version does not mean that there are different original manuscripts. There's only one set of original manuscripts for the Quran, one set, and one set for the Bible. The books of the Bible aren't different versions of the Bible. They are contributory. Consensus or a group of letters and statements, so on, from Old and New Testament were combined together because there's evidence when you read it carefully that they do belong together, and no other books belong with it because these 66 books are inerrant without errors and corroborate one another perfectly. They're complete. There'll be new revelation thereafter, after the age, this church age is over with, and the millennial age begins. That revelation will be either put down or understood or memorized because everybody during the millennial rule that are born-again believers, especially those who are part of the body of Christ in supernatural resurrection bodies like the Lord's, will have a perfect memory of the Bible. And that generation of Israelites will have a perfect memory of the Bible. Will be perfectly sinless. It'll be astonishing. I've never seen a human being who's been perfect, but now you will. A manuscript analysis of the Quran does present us with unique problems not encountered with the Bible. While we can find multiple manuscripts for the Bible written 700 to 900 years earlier, at a time when the durable paper was not even used, the manuscripts for the Quran within the century in which it was purported to have been compiled, the 7th century, simply do not exist. Prior to 750 A.D., thus for 100 years after Muhammad's death, we have no verifiable Muslim documents which can give us a window into this formative period of Islam. Wansbrough, author Wansbrough in 1978. In fact, the primary sources which we possess are from 150 to 300 years after the events which they describe, and therefore are quite distant from those events. The New Testament comes out within the same year that Jesus resurrected and went to heaven, ready to come back after the church age is over, and the 7-year tribulation period is about ready to tear the entire planet Earth up. For that reason, they are, for all practical purposes, secondary sources, as they rely on other material, much of which no longer exists. These primary sources for which we possess from 150 years to 300 years after the events they describe for the Quran. For that reason, they are, for all practical purposes, secondary sources, as they rely on other material, much of which no longer exists. I say that double. I want you to understand that. There's a propaganda testimony by adherents of the Muslim religion, and then there are some facts. Between the first Arab conquest, the early 7th century, and the appearance with which sira-maghazi narratives of the earliest Islamic literature, that's around the late 8th century, we should expect to find in those intervening 150 years at least remnants of evidence for the development of the old Arab religions towards Islam, the Muslim traditions. Yet we find nothing. The documentary evidence at our disposal prior to 750 A.D. consists almost entirely of rather dubious citations in later compilations. Consequently, we have no reliable proof that the later Muslim traditions speak truly of the life of Muhammad, or even of the Quran. In fact, we have absolutely no evidence for the original Quranic text. And my friend told me it's in Saudi Arabia, and that everybody has to go there to get their translation. Nor do we have any of the alleged 4 copies which were made of this recension and sent to Mecca, Medina, Basra, and Damascus. Even if these copies had somehow disintegrated with age, as some Muslims now allege, for lack of proof, there would surely be some fragments of the document which we could refer to, like we have in the Bible. Tens of thousands of documents, full, whole, and piece. 55,000 for the New Testament and 9 to 10,000 for the Old. By the end of the 7th century, Islam had expanded from Spain in the west to India in the east. The Quran, according to tradition, was the centerpiece of their faith. Certainly within that enormous sphere of influence, there would be some Quranic documents or manuscripts which still exist to this day. Nope, yet there is nothing anywhere from that period at all. With the enormous number of manuscripts available for the Christian experience, scriptures, all compiled long before the time Muhammad was born, it is incredible that Islam cannot provide a single corroborated manuscript of their most holy high book from even within a century of the founder's birth. Well, Samarkand and Topkapi, MSS, manuscripts, Kufic, and Maya scripts, in response to Muslims, contain that they do have a number of these Uthmanic recensions. Their original copies, these original copies from the 7th century, still in their possession. There are 2 documents which do hold some credibility and to which many Muslims refer. These are the Samarkand Manuscript, which is located in Tashkent Library, Uzbekistan, in the southern part of the former Soviet Union, and the Topkapi Manuscript, which can be found in Topkapi Museum in Istanbul, Turkey. So I don't see any Saudi Arabia here. These 2 documents are indeed old, and there has been ample etymological analysis done on them by scriptologists, as well as experts in Arabic calligraphy, to warrant their discussion. What most Muslims do not realize is that these 2 manuscripts are written in the Kufic script, a script which, according to modern Quranic manuscript experts such as Martin Langs and Yashin Yahamad Safadi, did not appear until late into the 8th century, and was not in use at all in Mecca and Medina in the 7th century. The reasons for this are quite simple. Consider the Kufic script, properly known as Al-Khat. Al-Kafi derives its name from the city of Kaffa in Iraq. It would be rather odd for this script to have been adopted as the official script for the mother of all books, as it is a script which had its origins in a city that had only been conquered by the Arabs a mere 10 to 14 years earlier. It is important to note that the city of Kufa, which is in present-day Iraq, was a city which could have been Sassanid or Persian before that time. Thus, while Arabic would have been known there, it would have been known, it would not have been the predominant language, let alone the predominant script very much later. We know, in fact, that the Kufic script reached its perfection during the late 18th century, up to 150 years after Muhammad's death. Thereafter, it became widely used throughout the Muslim world. This makes sense, since after 750 A.D., the Abbasids controlled Islam, and due to their Persian background, were headquartered in the Kufa and Baghdad area. They would thus have wanted their script to dominate, having been themselves dominated by the Umayyads, who were based in Damascus, for around 100 years. It would now be quite understandable that an Arab script which originated in their area of influence, such as the Kufic script, would evolve into that which we find in these 2 documents mentioned here. Therefore, it stands to reason that both the Topkapi and Samarkand manuscripts, because they are written in the Kufic script, could not have been written earlier than 150 years after the Uthmanic recension was supposedly compiled. At the earliest date, the late 700s and early AD 800s, was the time that this occurred. We do know that there were 2 earlier Arabic manuscripts, which most modern Muslims are not familiar with. And these are the Al-Mahlil script, developed in the Hijaz, particularly in Mecca and Medina, and the Mosh Script, also developed in Medina. The Al-Mahlil Script came into use in the 7th century and is easily identified as it was written at a slight angle. Now he shows a book there, Gilchrist's book, that has pictures of it. In fact, the word al-ma'ir means slanting. This script survived for about 2 centuries before falling into disuse. The Mosh Script also began in the 7th century, but continued to be used for many centuries. It is more horizontal in form and can be distinguished by a somewhat cursive and leisurely style. There are those who believe that the Mosh Script was a forerunner to the later Kufic script, as there are similarities between the two. If the Quran had been compiled at this time in the 7th century, then one would expect it to have been written in either the Mahil script or the Mosh script. Interestingly, we do have a Quran written in the Mahil script and considered to be the earliest Quran in our possession today. Yet it is not found in either Istanbul or Tashkent, but ironically it resides in the British Museum in London, England. It has been dated towards the end of the 8th century by Martin Lings, the former curator for the manuscripts of the British Museum, who is himself a practicing Muslim. Therefore, with the help of script analysis, we are quite certain that there is no known manuscripts of the Quran which we possess today which can be dated from the 7th century. Furthermore, virtually all the earliest Quranic manuscripts fragments which we do possess cannot be dated earlier than 100 years after the time of Muhammad. In her book Calligraphy and Islamic Culture, Anne-Marie Schimmel underlines this point when she states that apart from the recently discovered Qur'ans in Sana'a, the earliest datable fragments go back to the first quarter of the 8th century. From the evidence we possess, therefore, it would seem improbable that any portions of the Quran supposedly copied out of Uthman's direction have survived. What we are left with is the intervening 150 years for which we cannot account. Now we have another problem with the manuscript evidence of the Quran. Manuscript evidence means the original text copied down in Arabic. There are other versions because the Quran reaches out to all peoples of all backgrounds and groups throughout the world. So they don't speak Arabic, most people don't, so they have to translate it properly, hopefully, into their native languages. That's the meaning of versions. Same goes for the Bible, except we have tens of thousands of documents to support the original text, largely in the original languages. Possibly the greatest puzzlement for Christians who pick up the Quran and read it are the numerous seemingly biblical stories which bear little similarity to the biblical accounts. The Quranic stories include many distortions, amendments, and some bizarre additions to the familiar stories we have known and learned. So we ask, where did these stories come from, if not from the previous scriptures? Fortunately, we do have much Jewish and Christian apocryphal literature, some of which comes from the Talmud, dating from the 2nd century A.D., with which we can compare many of those stories. It is when we do so that we find remarkable similarities between these fables or folk tales of the later Jewish and Christian communities and the stories which are recounted in the Quran. Note the Talmudic material taken from Feinberg in 1993. The Jewish Talmudic writings were compiled in the early 2nd century A.D. from oral laws, Mishnah, and traditions of the laws of Gemara. These laws and traditions were created to adapt the law of Moses, the Torah, to the changing times. There are also included interpretations and discussions of the laws, the Halakha, and the Haggadah. Most Jews do not consider the Talmudic writings authoritative, but they read them nonetheless with interest for the light they cast on the times in which they were written, mainly for background information, but certainly not biblical. Each generation embellished the accounts, or at times incorporated local folklore, so that it was difficult to know what the original stories contained. There were even those among the Jews who had believed that the Talmudic writings had been added to the preserved tablets, the Ten Commandments and the Torah, which were kept in the Ark of the Covenant. These were believed to be replicas of the heavenly book.